The night before New Year's Eve arrived like a quiet warning, cold and heavy, settling over the city with the kind of silence that makes loneliness feel louder. Snow clung to the sidewalks in dirty patches, and the streetlights flickered as if they were tired of pretending things were bright. In a small diner tucked between a shuttered bookstore and a closed laundromat, a woman sat alone in a booth, counting 3 crumpled dollar bills with hands that trembled more from exhaustion than the cold. This was all she had to welcome the coming year. And she had no idea that within the next hour, a single, unexpected act would change the direction of her life forever. Before the story goes any further, let me ask you something. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet miracles that happen when people choose compassion over indifference, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us that even the smallest gestures can rewrite someone's future. The woman's name was Clara, though no one in the diner knew it, and no one had asked. She wore a thin coat that had once been navy blue, but had faded into something closer to gray, its sleeves frayed at the cuffs. Her hair was pulled back in a loose knot, not out of style but necessity, and her face carried the look of someone who had learned to brace herself for disappointment. She had come into the diner not because she was hungry, but because the cold had finally beaten her down. $3 was barely enough for a cup of soup and a piece of bread, but it bought her a seat, warmth, and a few minutes where she could pretend she belonged somewhere. The waitress, overworked and underpaid, moved past her booth without much notice, and Clara didn't blame her. People like Clara learned early not to expect attention. She stared out the window as cars passed, their headlights streaking across the glass like brief flashes of lives still moving forward. Just a year earlier, she had been one of those people, rushing home from work, complaining about traffic, planning what dress to wear on New Year's Eve. Then the factory closed without warning, her savings evaporated paying rent, and her marriage, already fragile, collapsed under the weight of financial strain. By autumn, she had nowhere left to go. She ordered the cheapest item on the menu, folding her $3 neatly on the table as if presenting them with dignity might make them worth more. As she waited, she thought about the year ahead, about how people talked about new beginnings as if they were guaranteed. For her, the future felt like a blank page she wasn't allowed to write on. She wondered if anyone would notice if she disappeared entirely, if the city would simply absorb her absence the way it absorbed everything else. That was when the diner door opened again, letting in a sharp gust of cold and a man carrying a small boy bundled in an oversized jacket. The man looked tired in a different way than Clara did, the kind of tired that came from responsibility rather than defeat. His shoulders were tense, his eyes constantly scanning the room, as if measuring risks and costs with every step. The boy clutched a worn stuffed bear, its fur matted from years of love, and pressed his face into the man's shoulder as they walked in. They took a booth a few tables away. The man helped the boy out of his coat and sat across from him, rubbing his hands together to warm them. Clara tried not to look, but something about them pulled her attention. Maybe it was the way the man smiled at the boy, a soft, protective smile that didn't quite hide the worry beneath it. Maybe it was the way the boy's eyes lit up at the sight of the menu, as if this modest diner were a palace. Clara returned to her thoughts, but the presence of the pair lingered in her awareness. She noticed the man counting his money too, a small stack of bills and coins, more than hers but not much more. She recognized that look, the calculation, the silent negotiation between hunger and responsibility. He was a single father. She could tell that much without being told. Life had etched it into his posture. Her soup arrived, steaming and thin, and she wrapped her hands around the bowl, savoring the heat. She ate slowly, stretching each spoonful, not wanting the moment to end. Around her, the diner hummed with low conversation, forks clinking against plates, the radio murmuring about holiday traffic and year-end sales. It all felt distant, like she was watching the world through glass. As she finished her meal, Clara noticed the boy glance in her direction. His eyes lingered on her bowl, then on her face, curious but unafraid. She gave him a small smile, one she hadn't realized she still knew how to make. The boy smiled back, wide and unguarded, and then turned to the man, tugging at his sleeve. The man followed his gaze and looked at Clara. Their eyes met for just a second, long enough for something unspoken to pass between them. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. The man didn't look away quickly like most people did when faced with someone who had clearly fallen on hard times. Instead, he nodded, a simple gesture, but one that felt like acknowledgement rather than pity. Clara looked down, embarrassed by the sudden warmth in her chest. She paid for her soup, leaving no tip because there was nothing left to give, and slid out of the booth. As she pulled on her coat, bracing herself for the cold, she heard movement behind her. The man was standing now, guiding the boy toward the counter. She stepped outside, the icy air biting at her face, and began to walk with no real destination in mind. The night felt heavier than before, the streets emptier. She had gone only a few steps when she heard footsteps behind her, quick but careful. The man called out, not loudly, but enough to reach her. He approached, the boy at his side, and held out a small paper bag. Inside was a sandwich, wrapped neatly, still warm. Clara froze, her first instinct to refuse, pride flaring even in her desperation. But the man's expression stopped her. There was no charity in his eyes, no sense of superiority, just sincerity, and something else, something like shared survival. He explained, without words but through his presence, that he understood, that he had been close to that edge himself, that sometimes helping someone else was a way of teaching his son what mattered most. The boy watched her closely, his face serious, as if this moment were important in a way he couldn't yet articulate. Clara accepted the bag, her fingers brushing the man's, and something inside her cracked open. She hadn't cried in months, not because she didn't want to, but because she couldn't afford to. Tears felt like a luxury. Now they came anyway, hot against the cold, and she laughed softly at herself, embarrassed but grateful. The man nodded again, said nothing, and guided the boy back toward the diner. Clara stood there for a long moment, clutching the sandwich as if it were fragile. The door closed behind them, and the street returned to silence, but the world felt different, warmer, less hostile. She found a bench and sat, eating slowly, each bite filling more than her stomach. It filled a space inside her she hadn't realized was empty. She thought about how close she had come to believing that kindness was gone, that people only looked out for themselves. One simple act had undone months of despair. The next morning, New Year's Eve, Clara woke with a strange feeling she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. The man and his son stayed in her thoughts. She didn't know their names, didn't know where they had gone, but they had given her something to hold on to. She spent the day at a local shelter, not as someone seeking help, but as someone offering it. She helped serve meals, clean tables, listen to stories. It felt like paying something forward, even if she had very little to give. Weeks later, through a chain of small coincidences that only make sense in hindsight, Clara found work at that same diner. The owner had noticed her helping at the shelter and offered her a chance. It wasn't much, but it was a start. On her first shift, she watched the door every time it opened, half hoping, half expecting to see a familiar man and a little boy walk in. They did, on a quiet afternoon in early spring. The boy spotted her first and waved enthusiastically, the stuffed bear tucked under his arm. The man smiled, surprised, and Clara felt something settle into place. Life hadn't suddenly become easy for any of them, but it had become connected, and that made all the difference. As the year went on, Clara rebuilt her life piece by piece. A room of her own, steady work, even laughter that came without effort. She never forgot that night, never forgot how close she had been to giving up, and how one act of kindness had pulled her back. If this story has reached you, if it stirred something in your heart, please take a moment now to like the video, share it with someone who needs a reminder that hope is real, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that matter. And before the ending, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from or sharing a moment when kindness changed your life. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to see. Because the truth is, miracles don't always arrive with fireworks or grand speeches. Sometimes they walk into a quiet diner on a cold night, carrying a child and a lesson in humanity. And sometimes, all it takes to change a life is $3, a warm sandwich, and the courage to see another person as yourself.